Let me ask you a question. In your experience with love, have you ever had a moment like this? You chased someone with everything you had, only to realize in the end that the person you loved was never really them, but a phantom you conjured up in your own mind. And all the while, the one who truly loved you, understood you, and was willing to catch you when you fell, was standing right behind you. Not only did you never turn around, you pushed him away again and again. When you finally wanted to turn back, he said one thing: even the most eternal love will run dry. Then he turned around and walked away. That is what we call the trial of love. The story I'm telling today lays bare the entire journey of a woman passing through this trial, how she fell in love with an illusion, how she pushed away her only true love, and how she didn't wake up until she'd lost everything. And the moment she finally woke up, it was too late. If you're currently chasing someone who may or may not love you, or if there's someone beside you that you've been ignoring all along, then today's story you absolutely must hear from beginning to end. Hello everyone, I'm Fanko. Today we're going to talk about a masterpiece that almost everyone has heard of, but very few have truly understood its love story. Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind. Many people remember that famous line, "Tomorrow is another day," and they remember Scarlett's strength and resilience amid the flames of war. But in my view, the most powerful thing about this book isn't its portrayal of war or survival. Rather, it uses two soul-searing love stories to lay bare every fatal mistake we tend to make in our own relationships, dissecting them with piercing clarity. What does it feel like to chase the wrong person? What price do you pay for pushing the right one away? How many losses must a person endure before truly passing through this trial of love? And when she finally makes it through, is there still time? Are you ready? Today's episode will be rather long, but I promise you, not a single minute will be wasted. Let's begin. Let's first meet our heroine, Scarlett, 16 years old. And from the moment she appears, she has the makings of an irresistible charmer. To sum her up in one line, an adorable, enchanting, yet flirtatious and capricious young girl. Nearly every man around her had proposed to her. Now guess what kind of man would a girl like this, raised as the center of everyone's universe, fall for? You guessed it, a man who doesn't love her. His name is Ashley. A head of beautiful golden hair, seemingly above it all, yet attentive and courteous to everyone, appearing unfathomably deep and impossibly distant. He was the finest chess player in the entire county, yet seemed indifferent to such social diversions. His passions were reading, music, and poetry, the quintessential unattainable dream, the flower on the highest peak. He had it all. Scarlett and Ashley had actually known each other since childhood, but she'd never paid him any attention. Until one day, 2 years ago, when something almost magical happened. Ashley rode up on horseback, magnificently dressed, arriving with effortless grace to visit Scarlett. What Scarlett saw through her eyes was this. Ashley dismounted in one fluid motion, stood there, looked up, and smiled at Scarlett. Brilliant sunlight fell upon his pale golden hair, crowning him with what seemed like a cap of shimmering silver. He said, "Scarlett, you've grown up." His voice was unhurried, rich and resonant, utterly pleasing to the ear. Then he walked lightly up the steps and kissed Scarlett's hand. Doesn't this scene feel exactly like one of those drama moments? 8 cameras, countless beauty filters, and slow motion capturing that heart-fluttering instant. And it was in that very moment that Scarlett fell. I don't know if you've ever heard that saying, "I love you," simply because the sunlight was just right that day, and you happened to be wearing the white shirt I liked. That white shirt and the golden light that the sun draped over Ashley's hair are exactly the same thing. They're both filters we project from our own minds. But 16-year-old Scarlett didn't understand any of this. Once she fell in, it would be many, many years. And the price she'd pay would be devastating. Scarlett had never encountered anyone with Ashley's complex and enigmatic personality before. This riddle of a man ignited her curiosity. And do you remember what we discussed when we talked about love in the time of cholera? Curiosity is one of love's many disguises. What's more, layered on top of curiosity was something else: her competitive spirit. because Ashley's restrained, hot and cold demeanor only strengthened Scarlett's determination to claim him entirely as her own. Curiosity plus competitive spirit, when these two obsessions merge, they become something that looks remarkably like love. It burns hotter than real love, blinds you more completely, and is far more dangerous. Then one day, Scarlett received a thunderbolt. Ashley was getting married, and the woman he was marrying was Scarlett's own cousin, a girl named Melanie. When your unattainable dream suddenly announces his engagement, who could bear it? Now most people upon hearing such news would simply grieve in private, right? But how did Scarlett react? She thought of Melanie's appearance with contempt. She's so plain, there's no way Ashley could truly love her. Scarlett was absolutely certain Ashley loved her, although Ashley had never once declared his love for her. Never mind that, just call it a woman's intuition. So she decided to find an opportunity to confess her feelings to Ashley directly. The day of her confession was at a party. Scarlett flirted with the men around her while scanning everywhere for Ashley. That's when she suddenly noticed another man, a stranger. This scene too could have been straight out of a drama. This man stood alone in the hallway, watching Scarlett with a cold and rather impolite expression. He looked at least 35, tall and muscular, with a face as dark as a pirate's and eyes that were bold and black. When their gazes met, he smiled at Scarlett. His face wore an air of cold indifference, yet the corners of his mouth curled with a roguish insolence. Scarlett couldn't help but catch her breath. She felt that the way he looked at her was as if he knew exactly what she looked like without her clothes on. Those of you with a keen eye have already sensed it. This level of detailed introduction at a character's entrance, classic male lead material. That's right, he is the hero of this story, Rhett Butler. But at this moment, Scarlett's mind was entirely consumed by Ashley. She had dressed so beautifully today, yet failed to draw Ashley to her side. Ashley had stayed by his fiancée Melanie the entire time, the two of them whispering away from the crowd, looking deeply intimate. As Scarlett observed from the shadows, her gaze once again locked with that man, Rhett. Rhett burst into laughter. Scarlett suddenly realized that this man was the only person at the party who could see through her wild exterior to the hidden thoughts beneath, and moreover, he derived pleasure from mocking her. In truth, this first encounter had already set the entire tone for their future relationship. Of course, Scarlett couldn't be bothered with any of that right now. She maneuvered until she finally found the chance to pull Ashley into a room alone. She got straight to the point. "I love you." Guess how Ashley reacted? Did he truly love her the way Scarlett imagined? When Ashley heard Scarlett's confession, he was utterly astonished. But there was something else in his eyes, the look you'd have when your beloved stallion breaks its leg, and you have no choice but to put it down. Then his face seemed to slip behind a well-practiced mask. He smiled at Scarlett with impeccable grace and said, "You've already stolen the heart of every man here today. Isn't that enough? You've always had my heart, you know that. You're beginning to grow up. When I first read this passage, I couldn't make sense of it at all. Is this love or not? Acceptance or rejection?" Scarlett was equally confused. She pressed on, "Then do I have your heart?" Ashley's hand quickly covered Scarlett's mouth. "You shouldn't say things like that, Scarlett. You don't mean it. You'll hate yourself for having said these things, and you'll hate me for having heard them." Scarlett had never seen such a tortured expression on anyone's face before. She asked, "You care, don't you? You do care, right?" Ashley said darkly, "I do care." But he immediately added, "Scarlett, can't we just leave and pretend none of this was ever said? I'm going to marry Melanie. Do you see it? He rejects you on the surface, but he never clearly tells you whether he loves you or not. Every time he sees you, he looks pained, as if he can't bear to lose you. If you've ever had a crush like this, congratulations, it'll cost you half your life." Scarlett then asked a fatal question. "Do you love Melanie?" Ashley didn't answer directly. He said, "She's very much like me, and we understand each other." Scarlett pressed, "But you said you care about me." Ashley said, "I shouldn't have said that. I apologize. How could I possibly not care about you? You're so passionate about life. You love and hate with abandon. You're like fire itself, like everything wild and fierce. These are things I could never be. Did you catch that? On the surface, he's complimenting Scarlett. But Scarlett immediately thought of Melanie. What kind of person is Melanie? Quiet eyes, gentle temperament, the complete opposite of Scarlett. So whatever Ashley says about admiring Scarlett for being like fire, he chose to marry someone like Melanie. Scarlett exploded. She unleashed a tirade, calling Ashley a coward. You'd rather live with that stupid little fool and raise a brood of mealy-mouthed brats, just like her. Absolutely brutal words. Then Ashley stopped her. You shouldn't say that about Melanie. Scarlett fired back. I shouldn't? Who are you to tell me what I should say? At this point, Scarlett finally realized something cruel. Ashley had never once crossed the boundary beyond friendship, but this only wounded Scarlett's pride and vanity more deeply. She hadn't been rejected, she'd been outdone by a woman she looked down upon. In a fury of humiliation, Scarlett slapped Ashley hard across the face. Ashley said nothing, simply lifted her hand to his lips, kissed it, and quietly left. Scarlett thought, I've lost him forever and ever. But more powerful than this sense of loss was another emotion: rage. Scarlett snatched up a nearby vase and hurled it across the room. That's when something dramatic happened. From deep within the sofa came a voice. This is too much. Someone had been in the room all along. You've probably guessed who it was, Rhett. He rose from the sofa where he'd been lying and bowed to Scarlett with an exaggeratedly courteous manner. Scarlett's face turned green. You were eavesdropping. You're no gentleman, Rhett said. You're the one who woke me up, actually. And you're no lady either. But you are a girl of rare vitality. Then he said something even more explosive. I simply cannot fathom what charm that refined Mr. Ashley could possibly hold for you. He should get down on his knees and thank God. He had clearly seen through Scarlett's true self, and he deeply admired what he saw. But Scarlett was furious. She stormed out and slammed the door. As soon as she stepped out, she overheard other girls gossiping behind her back about how scandalous her behavior was, speculating about whether she was in love with Ashley. Scarlett couldn't swallow this insult, so she made a very Scarlett decision: revenge. And her method of revenge was simple and brutal. She decided to marry a man named Charles. Who was Charles? He was Melanie's brother, Ashley's fiancé's brother, and also the boyfriend of the very girl who'd been gossiping about Scarlett. Two birds with one stone. And Scarlett didn't just marry Charles, she made sure to do it before Ashley's wedding. In less than 2 weeks, she was married. What a power move. This was Scarlett's first marriage. Not for love, but for revenge. To spite Ashley, she'd turned her own lifelong commitment into a weapon she grabbed on impulse. But what's even more tragic, she still couldn't let go. Every day after the wedding, all she could think about was Ashley. She was convinced Ashley loved her, but was simply bound by his sense of honor. In Scarlett's heart, her love for Ashley was something sacred, something so beautiful it took her breath away. Different from passion, different from marriage. She asked for nothing. If only Ashley would admit he loved her. Kiss her just once, she'd be content. Can you hear it? This is no longer love. This is obsession. After this, the story moves quickly. The American Civil War broke out. Both Charles and Ashley enlisted to fight for the South. Within barely 2 months, Charles died on the battlefield. 17-year-old Scarlett became a widow overnight. Soon after, Charles's posthumous child was born. After this series of ordeals, Scarlett became deeply listless and despondent because every young man had gone off to war, and as a widow, she was expected to be solemn, aloof, and perpetually restrained in her words and conduct, never again permitted to interact with men. All those flirtatious skills she'd spent years perfecting were now completely useless. Scarlett thought, married life holds no pleasure whatsoever for women, and being a widow is worse than being dead. To lift her spirits, her mother sent her to Atlanta to live with Melanie and Aunt Pittypat. At first, her life there was agonizingly dull, until one day, she heard about a charity ball being held to raise funds for the war. Scarlett was thrilled and rushed off to attend. At the ball, she encountered Rhett once again. He still wore that same arrogant, insolent expression as he fixed his gaze upon Scarlett. He walked straight over to chat her up and invited her to dance. Their conversation about dancing is, I think, particularly interesting. Scarlett was still feigning propriety. "I'd better not dance, the other girls will gossip about me." Rhett said, "Does it matter what other women say about you?" Scarlett said, "It doesn't. Though people think a girl ought to care about such things. But tonight, I don't care." Rhett then said something absolutely pivotal. "Wonderful. You're beginning to think for yourself now, and that's the beginning of wisdom. Until you've lost your reputation, you'll never realize what a burden it was, or what true freedom really means." Scarlett instinctively countered, "Well, there are things money can't buy, like happiness and love." Rhett said, "Generally speaking, it can. And when it can't, you can always purchase some rather excellent substitutes." And so the two of them chatted and danced, one dance after another, under the gaze of everyone in the room. After the dance, Scarlett thought, "Now that my reputation is already ruined, nothing anyone says can matter anymore." How to put it? Once a person's carefully constructed image collapses, standing on the rubble, there's nothing left to lose, and in that, paradoxically, a kind of freedom is gained. Scarlett didn't even realize at the time that this very thought had been planted in her mind by Rhett, the legendary guiding lover. But in her heart, Scarlett's thoughts still lingered on Ashley. She'd even done some outrageous things, like secretly reading the letters Ashley wrote to Melanie. She found that the letters were filled with boring topics like war, books, and beliefs. After reading them, Scarlett was actually pleased with herself. "Wonderful. Ashley still loves me. These letters aren't love letters at all, they're so dull. Do you see what's happening?" She wasn't analyzing whether Ashley loved Melanie. She was using every piece of evidence to reinforce the conclusion she'd already drawn. What kind of psychology is this? It's called confirmation bias. When you've already decided something is true, you automatically filter out all contradicting evidence and keep only what supports your belief. Yet on the other side, the man who was actually by Scarlett's side every day was that man Rhett. Ever since their dance at the charity ball, every time Rhett came to town, he'd seek Scarlett out, take her for carriage rides, accompany her to parties, wait for her outside the hospital, and drive her home. How was that any different from dating? As Scarlett got to know Rhett better, she discovered something. Regardless of how others judged him, she knew that Rhett's deliberate gallantry and ornate words were all completely insincere. In a way, only the two of them knew exactly what the other truly was. But Scarlett couldn't be sure whether Rhett had fallen in love with her, because Rhett had never once declared his love, nor had he ever shown jealousy toward the other men around her. Once, after he'd given her a gift she adored, she was already prepared to let him kiss her, but Rhett didn't kiss her. Instead, he burst out laughing and said, "I have no desire to marry anyone. I'm not the marrying kind." A quintessential rakish figure. And so gradually, Rhett stirred in Scarlett the desire to conquer him. That competitive urge flared up again. Scarlett thought hazily, "This looks like I've fallen for him, but I haven't. I truly can't figure it out." Do you think what Scarlett feels for Rhett right now is love? Don't rush to answer, let's keep watching. Ashley came home on leave from the war. Scarlett hadn't seen him in 2 years. At this reunion, she was startled by the sheer intensity of her own feelings. It turned out that the more she suppressed this love, the stronger it became. A week passed, and it wasn't until Ashley was about to leave again that Scarlett finally found a chance to say goodbye to him alone. But instead of sweetness, what she received was a devastating request. Ashley said, "Scarlett, would you look after Melanie for me? She's so fragile, kind, and timid like a child. And you're so strong. Will you help me?" Scarlett said, "No, I'm not strong enough." Ashley said, "You must be strong, or how could I bear it? Scarlett, you are so kind, so strong, and so beautiful. Perhaps I understand you better than most people do. I can see the beauty buried deep within your soul." The two stood there gazing at each other. Scarlett stood on tiptoe, waiting for Ashley to say those 3 crucial words. But Ashley didn't say them. And it was only after Scarlett's pleading that Ashley finally kissed her. The two nearly lost themselves in the moment, but Ashley pulled back just in time. Scarlett couldn't hold back any longer. Choking with emotion, she confessed, "I've always loved only you. I married Charles just to spite you." Ashley said, "Tell me you love me. Let me live the rest of my life on those words." Listen to that. Live the rest of my life on those words. He'd admitted it. But on his face, beyond the joy of being loved, what showed far more was humiliation and despair. He said nothing more and hurried away. Scarlett didn't care about any of that. She was now absolutely certain Ashley loved her, and had already begun fantasizing about being with him after the war. But her dream was shattered almost immediately. The blows came one after another. Melanie was pregnant. Ashley was wounded and captured on the battlefield. Worst of all, Atlanta was about to fall, and Melanie was still heavy with child. Scarlett had no choice. After all, she'd promised Ashley she'd look after Melanie, so she forced herself to swallow her pain and fear. And this young girl went to help deliver Melanie's baby and care for everyone in the household. After the delivery, she quickly sent a servant to find Rhett and ask for help. Rhett actually came. When he appeared with a horse and carriage, Scarlett felt immensely relieved. She felt that with Rhett by her side, she wasn't afraid anymore. A profound sense of security. But after they'd left the city, Rhett suddenly did something no one expected. He said, "Let us part here. I'm going off to fight." This Rhett, who had always mocked the war as meaningless while profiting from it handsomely, had now conceived this idea. Scarlett thought she must have misheard. That's when Rhett confessed. He said, "I love you, Scarlett. Because we're two alike, we're both rebels, selfish and wicked." Then he kissed Scarlett with deep emotion. But what Scarlett was thinking was, "He's leaving. He's going to leave me alone to face the Yankees." At this thought, she furiously slapped Rhett. But Rhett left all the same. And so, 19-year-old Scarlett dragged a cartload of the helpless a woman who'd just given birth, a newborn, and a servant with no ideas of his own onward through the flames of war. The hardships of that journey were truly breathtaking. She fought through every obstacle. She pushed through the battle lines and brought her entire caravan back to Tara. But what greeted her at home was yet another devastating mess. Her mother was dead, her father had gone mad, and her sisters were ill. So Scarlett rallied once more, leading the entire family to pick cotton, plant potatoes, hide from Yankees, and do whatever it took, no matter how desperate. As long as she could hold on to Tara, there was nothing she wouldn't do. And just like that, Scarlett transformed from a young girl into a mature woman with fiercely resolute eyes. She and Melanie also became incredibly close comrades through this ordeal. But have you noticed something? In Scarlett's most desperate moments, when she needed help the most, where was Ashley, the man she so deeply loved? In a prisoner of war camp. He couldn't do a thing. And the man who actually came to rescue her, she never gave him so much as a kind word. Soon the South lost the war, and Ashley finally came home. Scarlett was naturally overjoyed. But between her and Ashley stood Melanie. Scarlett would sometimes think with cruel malice, "Why didn't you just die giving birth in Atlanta? That way I could respectably marry Ashley and be a good stepmother." When such thoughts arose, Scarlett didn't even bother confessing to God she wasn't afraid of God anymore. But before any sweet reunion could begin, devastating news arrived. The government suddenly demanded $300 in taxes from Scarlett, or they'd seize Tara's land. Scarlett panicked instantly. And what was her first instinct? "I need to go talk to Ashley." Interesting, isn't it? Before there was a man she was in love with, Scarlett seemed capable of anything. Crossing battlefields, leading her family, killing, farming, nothing was beyond her. But the moment she was near the man she loved, she'd instantly become someone fragile. Before this, she'd been the spiritual pillar of the entire family. Now, faced with a crisis, her first thought was, "I need to go find Ashley." But could Ashley really live up to Scarlett's expectations? Their conversation this time practically sealed the fate of their relationship. Scarlett told Ashley about the tax demand, hoping he might offer some solution. Ashley said nothing. Scarlett asked, Don't you think we need to find the money somewhere? Ashley said, Yes, but where would we find it? Think about that, he responded, but offered absolutely nothing of substance. It's like telling your partner, I'm so stressed, babe, and they reply, Yeah, what are we gonna do, babe? There's always a response, but never any follow-through. Then Ashley said something loaded with meaning. I only know of one person who has money, and that's Rhett. The moment Scarlett heard Rhett's name, she was livid. It never even occurred to her that Ashley would be completely useless in this situation. Ashley said, Scarlett, I'm living here on your charity. Every day I'm escaping from reality. I'm actually a coward. The things we have to face now are worse than death to me. I'm afraid. Scarlett couldn't understand what Ashley was so afraid of. All she could say was, Ashley, are you afraid of going hungry? If so, don't worry. We'll manage somehow. At that moment, Ashley's eyes filled with admiration. But the very next second, his gaze drifted off to somewhere far away. Scarlett's heart sank. She knew that what Ashley was talking about had nothing to do with hunger. But she truly couldn't fathom what else there was to fear in this world of ruins. Besides starving, freezing, and losing one's home, Scarlett thought despairingly, Melanie would know what Ashley means. That thought was so devastatingly cruel. She'd spent over a decade loving this man, only to discover in the end she couldn't even understand what he was saying. And another woman, one she'd always looked down upon, was his true soulmate all along. But Scarlett hadn't awakened yet. Without Ashley's help, she felt all her strength draining away, and she no longer wanted to deal with any of it. She begged Ashley to run away with her. She was refused, of course. Utterly devastated, Scarlett buried her face in her hands and wept bitterly. Ashley hadn't expected that someone as fearless as Scarlett could break down and cry. His heart swelled with infinite tenderness and regret. He took Scarlett into his arms, comforted her softly, and then the two of them fell into an irresistible kiss. Scarlett was giddy with triumph at winning that kiss. But Ashley was in agony. He decided to take Melanie and the child and leave immediately. Who could withstand such emotional whiplash? Scarlett said desperately. Then I have nothing left. You're leaving, and Tara is being taken away. Ashley looked at Scarlett for a very long time. Then he bent down, scooped a small handful of red earth from the ground and said to Scarlett, No, there is something left. You love this soil more than you love me, though perhaps you don't know it. Then he pressed the earth into Scarlett's hands. The soil was ice cold. Scarlett finally understood. Ashley would never leave Melanie. Even if he loved Scarlett passionately until the day he died, he would never choose her. When it came to honor, he valued it far more than Scarlett did. Scarlett looked again at the red earth in her hands and finally spoke. Yes, I still have this. Then she said to Ashley with perfect clarity, You don't need to leave. I won't let all of you starve, just because I threw myself at you. It won't happen again. Then Scarlett turned and walked through the uneven fields toward the house. As she walked, she gathered her hair and twisted it into a knot at the nape of her neck. Ashley watched her receding figure, watched as she squared her thin, small shoulders while she walked. That posture etched itself deeply into his heart. When I read this passage, only one thought filled my mind. Scarlett is absolutely magnificent, and Ashley doesn't deserve her. After returning home, Scarlett shut herself in a dark room and thought very seriously. This year's taxes were settled, but next year they'd come again. What she needed was to escape this predicament once and for all. So she made a cold, clear-headed decision: marry Rhett, solve the money problem permanently, save Tara, save the family, and of course, Ashley too. But Rhett was in prison. So Scarlett stood before the long dressing mirror, studied her reflection, and held her chin high. But the woman staring back was gaunt and skeletal, with hollowed cheeks, a pale complexion, and broad patches sewn onto her skirt's hem. This look wouldn't win over Rhett. She knew Rhett had a weakness for fashionably dressed women. Scarlett began scanning the room. Then her gaze settled on something: the moss-green velvet curtains her mother had left behind. She ripped them down, and immediately set about making herself a new dress. Anyone witnessing this moment should feel their heart surge. This is Scarlett. Even if the entire world has crumbled, she'll find a weapon in the rubble. Ashley watched her step out in a dress made from curtains, wearing a hat trimmed with rooster tail feathers, and felt deep admiration, along with deep anguish. He knew that Scarlett was that kind of person. Even when defeat was clearly inevitable, she would still charge forward and fight to the very end, and he himself could not. Scarlett arrived at the prison. What followed her meeting with Rhett behind bars is arguably one of the most brilliant scenes in the entire novel. Though Rhett was casually dressed and unshaven, he looked rather at ease. He was delighted to see Scarlett and immediately moved to embrace her. Scarlett went to work. She began, "The moment I heard you'd been arrested yesterday, I was so heartbroken." Rhett said, "Were you?" And there wasn't a trace of doubt in his eyes. Things were going even more smoothly than Scarlett had anticipated. Rhett complimented her beauty, saying she looked like a fashionable woman from the streets of Paris. Scarlett was pleased and rose on tiptoe, twirling in her dress to show it off. Then she spoke about her life at Tara, but carefully maintained an air of not being poor at all. Rhett listened with fascination and said, "I've known many women far more beautiful and clever than you, and probably more virtuous and kind as well. Yet somehow, I can never get you out of my mind." Scarlett continued her performance of concern. "They wouldn't really hang you, would they?" Rhett asked. "Would you be sad for me? If you'd be sad enough, I'll put your name in my will." "His will?" Scarlett nearly laughed out loud. She quickly lowered her eyes, afraid of giving herself away. Unfortunately, she wasn't fast enough. Rhett's eyes flashed, as if he'd detected something. But Scarlett didn't notice. She pressed on, closing her eyes, trying desperately to squeeze out a few tears, while tilting her face up slightly so Rhett could kiss her without any effort. But Rhett didn't kiss her lips. He simply took her hand with the tenderness of a lover. Scarlett tried to read the expression on Rhett's face, but couldn't, because Rhett kept his head bowed the entire time. She thought, "Never mind, any moment now he'll propose, or at least confess his feelings, and then it'll all fall into place." Then something unexpected happened. Rhett turned Scarlett's palm over, about to kiss it, when he suddenly caught his breath. Her hands instantly betrayed her. They were not the hands of a pampered young lady at all. Years of hard labor had left them rough, sun-darkened to a brown, speckled with freckles. The nails were broken and jagged. The palms bore thick calluses, and on the thumb sat a blister that hadn't fully healed. Scarlett stared at her own hands in horror, and without thinking clenched them into fists. When I read this part, my heart clenched too. Rhett studied them for a long time, then finally looked up and said calmly, "Stop putting on airs. These are not the hands of a lady." Scarlett was still grasping at straws. "I went riding without gloves yesterday and roughened them." Rhett said, "Why do you lie to me? What's the real reason you came to see me? And here I thought you actually cared about me a little. What do you want from me? You need it urgently, don't you? So you put on this whole performance. Why didn't you just come out and say it? You would have had a better chance that way. At least it would have been honest. Instead, you come here jingling your earrings, pouting and batting your eyes." What followed was even harsher. But Rhett's voice was deathly calm. Scarlett was thoroughly terrified. Rhett continued, "You didn't think I was going to propose, did you? I told you, I'm not the marrying kind." Scarlett still hadn't given up. She switched strategies, trying to use his sympathy and their history together to get the money from him. Once Rhett understood the full story, he flatly refused. That's when Scarlett finally crumbled. Her face went ashen. She leapt to her feet, and the words poured out incoherently. Rhett held her while she fought him wildly, trying to bite his hand, kick his legs, pouring out every last drop of fury and despair. She was utterly exhausted. She fainted from sheer rage. When she came to, Rhett was tending to her. Scarlett was so angry she wanted to leave immediately. She said, "I hate you. From the very beginning, you knew what I was going to say, and you knew you wouldn't give me the money. Yet you let me go on. You could have spared me." Rhett replied, "If I'd spared you, I would have missed quite a show. There isn't much entertainment for me in here." Then he held Scarlett tightly and suddenly asked a strange question. Tell me, am I the only solution you could think of? Are there other men you're stringing along?" Scarlett said, "No." Rhett paused for a very long time after hearing this. Then he said, "You can come watch me hang. That should make you feel much better. Consider all old debts between us settled. I'll mention you in my will. Do you see what's happening here?" He saw through Scarlett, despised her for trying to deceive him, yet admired her willingness to do absolutely anything for Tara, and he still loved her. But Scarlett didn't believe a word Rhett said at this point. She began figuring things out on her own. On the carriage ride back from the prison, she happened to run into her sister's fiancé, Frank. The moment she heard he'd made quite a bit of money, Scarlett seized Frank without hesitation. 2 weeks later, she married him. She got the $300 and saved Tara. This was Scarlett's second shotgun wedding. The first was to spite Ashley. The second was to get the money to save Tara. Now put yourself in Rhett's shoes. If you were sitting in that prison and heard that Scarlett couldn't even wait 2 weeks before marrying someone else, how would you feel? Sure enough, the moment Rhett was released, he went straight to find Scarlett. He walked in and couldn't help but laugh. "My dearest Mrs. Kennedy, I hear you couldn't even wait 2 weeks. Women are so fickle. Don't you know I have $500,000? What a shame you married in such a rush." When Scarlett heard that number 500,000, the pain was so great, she didn't even register Rhett's mockery. Rhett lent Scarlett the money to buy the lumber mill she'd been dreaming of. From that point on, Rhett became virtually the only person in Scarlett's life she could depend on. He visited her regularly, helped her drum up business. They could talk about absolutely anything. Why? Because Scarlett didn't need to hide her motives or her true thoughts around Rhett. She couldn't even manage that in front of Ashley. Rhett would also encourage her. "If you want to be different, you have to accept being isolated, not just from your peers, but from your parents' generation and your children's generation too. They will never understand you." And whenever Scarlett tried using coquetry to get Rhett's help, she'd be mercilessly mocked. But the moment Scarlett lost her temper and showed her true colors, Rhett would roar with laughter like someone teasing a cat. Scarlett found being around Rhett rather thrilling, like sneaking sips of brandy. But it was only at night that her thoughts would drift to Ashley. Later, Frank died too, because Scarlett insisted on doing business during dangerous times, and Frank went to avenge her, only to be killed in the process. That night, Scarlett felt terribly lonely and afraid. Then Rhett came. The moment he walked in, he asked gently, "Do you need help?" Rhett was always like this. He understood Scarlett too well, and he always appeared precisely when she needed him most. The moment Scarlett heard those words, everything came pouring out like beans from an overturned jar. She said, "You know, I was actually glad when my own mother died, because then she couldn't see all the things I'd done." She said, "Sometimes, I really do try to be good to people, but then those nightmares come flooding back into my mind, terrifying me so much that all I want to do is rush out and snatch money from people's hands, whether it's mine or not." Then she began to cry. She also told Rhett, "In my dreams I'm always starving, running through fog, something chasing me, and I don't know where I'm going. When I wake up, I feel like all the money in the world couldn't free me from the fear of going hungry again." Rhett comforted her. Then he dropped a bombshell, a proposal. He said, "Now that Frank is dead, I thought you might be interested to know. I want you more than any man who's ever courted you. I'm leaving tomorrow for a long time, and I'm afraid that when I come back, you'll have married yet another man with a bit of money. Since you insist on marrying money, why can't it be me and my money?" Scarlett said, "There's no fun in being married. Maybe for men there is, but all a woman gets from marriage is food, a mountain of work, having to put up with a man's foolishness, and having a baby every year." Rhett laughed heartily. "That only proves you've been marrying the wrong men. Why don't you marry a young man with a bad reputation but who knows how to treat a woman? Namely, me. It would be great fun." At that moment, Scarlett suddenly thought of Ashley. Ashley was, in truth, the real reason she didn't want to marry. Although she didn't dislike Rhett, she even quite liked him at times. She always felt she belonged to Ashley, permanently. Every thought was written plainly on her face. Rhett saw right through her. Then he took Scarlett tightly in his arms and kissed her. In that dizzying kiss, Scarlett didn't know what came over her, but she surrendered quite quickly. She accepted Rhett's proposal. Rhett asked, "Are you serious? You won't change your mind? Why are you saying yes?" "Is it because of my money?" Scarlett said. "That's certainly part of it." Rhett didn't seem angry, but there was an urgency in his eyes. Scarlett continued, "You're the only man I've ever met who can handle the truth from a woman. Having a husband who doesn't think I'm a fool and doesn't expect me to lie, that would be rather nice." "And I like you," Rhett repeated. "You like me?" Scarlett said, "If I said I was madly in love with you, that would be a lie and you'd know it." Rhett, who had always preferred hearing the truth, this time didn't seem to want to hear it. He looked as though he'd been wounded. Scarlett said, "Don't sulk just because I didn't flatter you. After all, you don't love me either, so why should I love you?" Rhett said, "Right. I don't love you, just as you don't love me. But even if I did, you'd be the last person I'd ever tell." From an outsider's perspective, we can all sense it. Rhett loved Scarlett deeply, but he was too proud. And every time he tried to express his feelings to Scarlett, his words came out vague and sardonic. So Scarlett could never be sure of Rhett's love, and this way of expressing love laid the groundwork for every tragedy that followed. Married life, as it turned out, was actually happy. Scarlett could spend as much money as she pleased and do whatever she wanted. Rhett laughed at everything she did but encouraged her to be extravagant and unreasonable. He paid her bills, built her a grand house, and bought her mountains of jewelry. He was sometimes utterly indulgent with Scarlett, and sometimes mockingly cruel. He also encouraged Scarlett to speak her mind, encouraged her to be bold and flirtatious. When Scarlett had her recurring nightmare about starving, Rhett would hold her gently and say, "Scarlett, I'll take good care of you. I'll make you feel safe." But Scarlett never believed Rhett loved her. When she asked him why he married her, Rhett would laugh with mischief in his eyes and say, "I married you to keep you as a pet." Scarlett saw their marriage as nothing more than a transaction, and she was fairly satisfied with the deal. During the day, Rhett kept her schedule so packed she didn't have time to think about anything else. But at night, her thoughts would always drift to Ashley. When she lay in Rhett's arms, she'd think, "If only the person holding me were Ashley instead." Rhett sensed it every time. He would leave in a fury, then drink himself into a stupor, and not come home all night. Later, Scarlett gave birth to their daughter Bonnie, and Rhett became a completely devoted father. This marriage could have been happy enough, but one day, Ashley said something that blew everything apart. While going over accounts with Scarlett, he reproached her for becoming too hard-hearted and coarse in her business dealings. Then he said something astonishing. "It's Rhett who's made you this way. When I think of him touching you, He stopped mid-sentence and immediately apologized. But it was enough. This alone sent Scarlett's heart soaring. She finally confirmed that Ashley still loved her. She thought, "Even though we've both married other people, we've remained physically faithful to each other. How sweet, how romantic." Then she made a fatal decision. She would never share a bed with Rhett again, and she practically wanted Ashley to know about it too. The moment Scarlett told Rhett she wanted separate bedrooms, he guessed it had to do with Ashley. He said with a smile, "Then keep your chaste bed. There are beds everywhere in the world, and women everywhere." From that day on, Rhett never entered Scarlett's room again. When Scarlett had her nightmares, there was no longer a shoulder beside her to offer comfort. She suddenly felt very sad. She began to cry. Look at this Scarlett, so shrewd and calculating, had willingly pushed away the only man who truly loved her, all for an illusion. I think perhaps this is what makes obsession so terrifying. It drives you to do things so foolish that even you can't believe you did them. The story goes on. The final straw arrived with a weight heavier than anyone could have imagined. And it didn't come alone, it came in threes. The first straw, that night of ecstasy, fear, madness, and exhilaration. One day, it was Ashley's birthday. Melanie wanted to throw him a surprise party and asked Scarlett to go to the lumber mill first and keep Ashley occupied. Scarlett was delighted. Of course, she'd always yearned for more time alone with Ashley. But when she arrived, something strange happened. As she held Ashley's hand, she felt no thrill whatsoever. Before, the mere proximity of Ashley would have made her tremble. Now all she felt was a peculiar warmth of friendship and contentment, happy, but calm. This baffled Scarlett, and even alarmed her. How could this be? She noticed that Ashley was no longer young, no longer dazzling. His once gleaming hair had gone gray. He lived only in the past, refusing to face the present or the future. As Scarlett comforted Ashley and reflected on the journey that had brought her here, she couldn't help but cry. Ashley held her and offered comfort. There was no passion between them, no tension. Scarlett simply rested in Ashley's arms as a dear friend. And then the cruelest irony of all struck at the very moment Scarlett first saw Ashley as nothing more than a friend. Their embrace was witnessed by others. Scarlett wasn't afraid of gossip. She feared only two people, Melanie and Rhett. That evening, Rhett came home. Scarlett tried to explain, but Rhett refused to listen. He forced her to attend Ashley's birthday party very nearly, creating a spectacular public meltdown. Thankfully, Melanie, that angel, stepped forward and unreservedly trusted and defended Scarlett, averting the crisis. But the real ordeal came after they returned home. Rhett gripped Scarlett's arm and ordered her to sit. His demeanor and expression were those of a complete stranger. Scarlett had never been this terrified in her entire life. Rhett's eyes blazed with a fearsome light, something deeper than rage, something more intense than pain. Scarlett tried to fight back. "You can't understand what Ashley and I have. You've lived your whole life in filth and muck." Rhett said, "Yes, I am jealous of Ashley. I know that physically. You haven't betrayed me because Ashley didn't want you. He's too noble. He's a gentleman." Then he said something that cut to the bone. "You lay in my arms and pretended I was Ashley. You didn't think I knew, did you? What you don't know is Ashley never wanted your mind. But I did, and I could never have it. Just as you could never have Ashley's mind either. Everything was misaligned." This was the first time Rhett laid bare every truth in his heart. Then he carried Scarlett into the bedroom. That night, they spent a night of ecstasy, fear, madness, and exhilaration. The next morning, Scarlett actually felt wonderful. For the first time, she felt vitality, passion, and a dazzling sweetness. For the first time, she realized that Rhett had been in love with her all along. How strange, how incredible. As for her own feelings, she wasn't quite sure. But at the thought of seeing him again, a wave of nervous, awkward excitement and joy surged through her like a new bride. But Rhett was gone. 2 days passed with no sign of him. On the morning of the third day, Rhett returned. He told Scarlett he'd been with a prostitute, and he was leaving, taking their daughter Bonnie with him. Scarlett was shattered. She'd thought Rhett loved her. It had all been a misunderstanding. She immediately resolved to swallow her tears, determined not to let Rhett see that she cared. And so, Rhett left. Do you see what happened? This had been the perfect chance for reconciliation. If that morning, Scarlett hadn't waited for Rhett to come to her, but had gone to find him first. If Rhett hadn't fled the next morning out of fear of rejection, everything would have been different. But they were both too proud, both waiting for the other to speak first, both standing on their side of the door, waiting for the person on the other side to knock. But neither one knocked. The second straw, Bonnie. Their most beloved daughter Bonnie died in a horseback riding accident. Scarlett raged at Rhett, blaming him for killing their child. Rhett blamed Scarlett for never caring about Bonnie. The two of them kept wielding the sharpest knives against each other. Rhett began spending less and less time at home, often drunk, unkempt, his body going to ruin. He no longer laughed, no longer comforted Scarlett. Scarlett knew she shouldn't have blamed Rhett like that. She knew perfectly well that Rhett was in even more pain than she was. He had loved Bonnie so dearly. She wanted to apologize. But somehow, the right moment never seemed to come. It grew harder and harder to speak up. In the end, apologizing became the impossible thing. Relationships between people collapse exactly like this, through one missed chance after another, to simply open your mouth and speak. The third straw, the final one, Melanie. Melanie died. Scarlett lost the most important person in her life, her only true friend. She was utterly alone and helpless. She desperately wished Ashley would come to her aid, but when she found Ashley, he was even more lost and helpless than she was. Ashley said, "All the strength I ever had left with Melanie." In that moment, for the first time in her life, Scarlett truly understood Ashley. She finally realized Ashley had always loved Melanie. He had never truly loved her. But upon learning this, Scarlett discovered she wasn't heartbroken. She didn't care anymore, because she no longer loved him either. What she felt for Ashley now was nothing but sympathy, tinged with a trace of contempt. She couldn't make sense of it. "I loved him for so many years. How is it possible that love can vanish into indifference in a single instant? What on earth happened?" Then she spoke the words we quoted at the very beginning of this video. She said, "He never really existed at all, except in my imagination. I fell in love with things I made up in my own head. I fashioned a beautiful suit of clothes and fell in love with it. And when Ashley came riding up, so handsome, so different from everyone else, I draped that suit over him whether it fit or not, and I refused to see him for who he really was. What I'd loved all along was that suit of clothes, not him." If only Ashley had rejected Scarlett's confession more decisively back then, indulging her vanity just a little, his value in her heart would actually have declined. It was precisely his ambiguous push and pull, seemingly willing yet always retreating attitude that kept feeding Scarlett's obsession. Once she'd figured all this out, Scarlett headed home. On the way home, she walked through a stretch of woods. Suddenly, she realized the landscape of her nightmares was nearly materializing before her. Everything important in the world had vanished, and a nameless terror was driving her forward. Scarlett began running desperately. Then she caught sight of the outline of the house in the distance, and a feeling of calm suddenly washed over her heart. That was where she'd been trying to go all along. Home. Back to Rhett. The answer had never been Ashley. Scarlett finally understood. All these years, she'd taken Rhett's love for granted, and Rhett had stood silently behind her, all along, loving her, understanding her, ready to help at any moment. She realized that she had loved Rhett all along. She thought, if Ashley hadn't been standing in the way, she would have recognized her love for Rhett long ago. "I couldn't see the world clearly because Ashley was always blocking my view." Her blood surged hot, and she gathered her skirts and ran lightly. This time, she wasn't running from fear. She was running toward Rhett. But the moment she saw Rhett's face, every word died on her lips. Rhett's gaze was perfectly calm, almost kind, and that kindness frightened Scarlett. She wanted desperately to cry out, "I love you," but something in Rhett's expression held her back. Rhett's voice was soft yet cold. "Melanie's dead. That makes things more convenient for you, doesn't it?" Scarlett was stung. "You know how much I loved her." Rhett then heard that Melanie, on her deathbed, had entrusted Ashley to Scarlett's care as well. He laughed. "With the late wife's blessing, how convenient. Congratulations, your dream has come true." Scarlett trembled. "That's exactly what I came running home tonight to tell you." Rhett cut her off. He said, "I don't want to hear anything. It's all written plainly on your face anyway. Someone made you realize that Mr. Ashley is dead sea fruit too much even for you to bite into. And that same something has suddenly cast my charms in a fresh, new light." He sighed softly. "But it's no use talking about it now." Then he spoke the words that shatter the heart. "If you'd told me all this before, I would have gotten on my knees and thanked God. But none of it matters now. Even the most eternal love will run dry. I've loved you for many years, but I could never let you know, because you are so cruel to the people who love you. Scarlett, I knew when we married that you didn't love me, but I was foolish enough to think I could make you care. I wanted to take care of you, love you, give you everything you wanted. I wanted you to stop fighting, and I would fight for you instead. I wanted you to play, to be like a child again, because that's what you were, a brave, frightened, willful child. Of all the people you've ever known, I am the only one who saw the real you and loved you anyway. I loved you, and I took my chance. I thought Ashley would fade from your heart eventually. I tried everything I knew, but nothing worked. That night we were together, I couldn't face you the next morning. I was afraid you didn't love me. I was afraid you'd laugh at me. So I left and drank myself into oblivion. When I came back, if you had given me the slightest sign, the tiniest hint, I would have knelt down and kissed your feet. But you didn't. Scarlett protested immediately. But I did want you then. That was the first time I knew I cared about you. After that, I was never happy about Ashley again. Rhett said, "It seems we've been misunderstanding each other all along. But it doesn't matter now. I poured all my love for you into our daughter Bonnie, the little girl you used to be, before war and poverty had damaged you. I spoiled her, the way I'd wanted to spoil you. But she wasn't like you, she loved me. I could give her all the love you didn't want. It was the most blissful thing. When she died, she took everything with her." Scarlett did something then that she'd never done before. She felt sorry for Rhett, and her sorrow for him was even greater than her own pain. For the first time in her life, she truly understood another person. She understood Rhett's stubborn pride, his refusal to admit his love, all because he feared rejection. Scarlett said, "Darling, I'm so sorry, but I'll make it up to you. We can be happy together. We can even have more children." Rhett's answer was, "Thank you. That won't be necessary. I won't risk my heart again. You really are like a child. Do you honestly think that saying I'm sorry can undo years of mistakes and wounds? All I feel for you now is sympathy and kindness." Scarlett asked, "You don't love me anymore?" Rhett said, "That's right." Scarlett said, "But I love you." Rhett said, "That is your misfortune. I'm leaving." Scarlett made one last attempt. "Take me with you." Rhett said firmly, "No." Scarlett nearly broke down and wailed like a child, but a last shred of dignity and common sense held her still. She thought, even if he doesn't love me, he should at least respect me. What a powerful insight. So often we forget that respect matters more than love. Scarlett lifted her chin and asked as calmly as she could, "Where are you going?" A flash of admiration crossed Rhett's eyes. He said, "I'm going to find my family." Then he said his final words, "What's broken can never be as good as new. Once it's broken, it's broken. I no longer care what you do or where you go." And just like that, Scarlett lost Rhett. When she looked back at the two men in her life, she thought, "I never understood either of them, and so I lost them both. If I had understood Ashley before, I never would have fallen in love with him. If I had understood Rhett, I never would have lost him." Now, stripped of everything, Scarlett thought once more of her Tara. And the moment Tara entered her mind, it was as if a gentle, cool hand had brushed across her heart. The people in Scarlett's family didn't know the meaning of defeat, even when defeat was staring them straight in the face. She believed she could win Rhett back. She knew she could do it. There had never been anything she set her mind to that she couldn't achieve. She thought, "I'll think about it tomorrow. I'll think about it at Tara, then I'll be able to bear it. Tomorrow, I'll find a way to get him back. After all, tomorrow is another day." And there you have it, Scarlett's two love stories, told in full. Now, I want to return to the question I asked you at the beginning. In your own experience with love, have you ever had a moment like this? You chased someone with everything you had, only to realize that the person you loved was never really them? It took Scarlett over a decade to figure this out. But what I want to explore isn't the fact that she figured it out, it's why it took her so long. Think about it, what kind of person is Scarlett? She crossed through fire and war, led her family, killed when she had to, farmed, and built everything from nothing. This is an extraordinarily clear-headed, extraordinarily fierce woman. Yet when it came to love, this one thing, she was as blind as could be. Why? Because the blind spots we carry into love have nothing to do with how smart we are. They have to do with one thing, the deepest void within you. When 16-year-old Scarlett fell for Ashley, it looked like curiosity and competitive spirit on the surface. But what was it really? She saw in Ashley everything she lacked. Ashley was quiet, deep, cultured, all qualities that simply didn't exist in Scarlett. She mistook this for love, but it was actually longing. And when longing goes unanswered, it hardens into obsession. Once obsession takes root, it no longer needs the other person to cooperate. It grows all on its own. And so Scarlett said, "I fashioned a beautiful suit of clothes and fell in love with it, and then draped it over him whether it fit or not." What makes this line so devastating? It's devastating because she finally admitted she was the one who made that suit of clothes. Ashley didn't deceive her, she chose not to see the truth. And the second layer cuts even deeper. While Scarlett had her gaze locked entirely on this suit of clothes that never existed, she simply had no eyes left to see the person standing behind her. From day one, Rhett saw through the real Scarlett, her selfishness, her vanity, her greed, her fear, and he said, "This is exactly who I love." What kind of love is that? It's saying, "You don't need to wear any costume at all. I love you exactly as you are." But Scarlett couldn't receive it. Not because she didn't like Rhett, but because she couldn't believe it. A person who'd clawed her way out of war and ruin had insecurity carved into her very bones. She didn't dare entrust herself to someone she couldn't be certain of. And Rhett, he chose to love her in the most insecurity-inducing way possible, with sarcasm, provocation, and a mouth that proclaimed indifference. He was too proud. So proud that he refused to let Scarlett know how deeply he cared. Because he was afraid of rejection. So what you see is a devastatingly cruel tableau, two people who had actually fallen in love with each other long ago, yet one didn't dare to believe, and the other didn't dare to speak. One pinned her sense of security on an illusion. The other hid his vulnerability behind armor. From start to finish, only a single door separated them. Both raised their hands to that door, but neither one knocked. This is the trial of love. The trial of love isn't some flowery literary phrase. It's a real threshold, one that reappears again and again throughout your life. Its essence isn't about meeting the wrong person or bad luck. Its essence is this: do you have the courage to take off the suit of clothes you made and see the person across from you as they truly are? And do you have the courage to remove your armor and let the person across from you see the real you? Scarlett finally managed it. In a single night, she saw through everything. Ashley was not the man she loved. Rhett was. But the moment she saw the truth, Rhett spoke those words: "Even the most eternal love will run dry." This is the most heartbreaking line in the entire novel. Not because love had disappeared, but because it never had to. If only 1 day earlier, 1 month earlier, 1 year earlier, even if just that very morning, before Rhett had walked out the door, Scarlett had gone over and knocked on that door, everything would have been different. But she didn't. So if you ask me, can Scarlett win Rhett back? I don't know. But I don't think that's the most important question anymore. What matters most is Scarlett finally passed through her trial of love. She no longer needs that suit of clothes. For the first time, she looked at the world through her own real eyes, and for the first time knew who she loved and what she truly wanted. Whether or not Rhett ever comes back, this Scarlett is no longer the same girl who spent years chasing a phantom. This is the price of passing through the trial of love. You have to lose something first before you can truly see anything clearly. Finally, I'd like to turn this question back to you. In your love life right now, is there a suit of clothes you've made yourself, draped over someone? Is there someone behind you that you've never really looked at? Is there a door beside you that you've always wanted to knock on but never did? If so, I can't tell you what to do, because each person's trial of love can only be faced alone. But I can tell you the one thing Scarlett's story taught me: don't wait until it runs dry. Because loving someone is hard, but what's even harder is recognizing love while it's still there. I'm Fanko. May you pass through your own trial of love. See you next time.